From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. When we hear his call, we hear no mere bird. We hear the trumpet in the orchestra of evolution. That's a quote about the Sandhill crane, the majestic bird whose call you're hearing now. It's from Aldo Leopold, the famous nature writer. Leopold drew inspiration from the Sandhill crane's calls, their mating behaviors, and the fact that these birds have existed for 2.5 million years. In our state, crowds of Sandhill crane admirers gather in southern Colorado each spring to watch these birds, which have recovered after nearly being wiped out a century ago.
It's a really inspiring thing to see and hear the Sandhill cranes. They represent recovery, and they represent the resiliency of nature.
That's Scott Weidensall. He's a writer and ornithologist who's the keynote speaker at this year's Monte Vista Crane Festival in the San Luis Valley. It starts this Friday. Scott joined me to talk about the role these birds play in our imagination and why he has found them so inspiring. Scott, help us picture Sandhill cranes. For someone who's never seen them, can you start by describing what these birds look like?
Well, they're big birds. They're almost 4 feet tall. It's a bird that can kind of look you in the eye.
Whoa.
Long, gangly legs, long, skinny neck, a red crown of bare skin on their head. I just have always found them very human-like in their appearance, but also in their behavior. They have these incredibly complex behaviors. But when you picture Sandhill cranes, you should also mentally picture the sound of Sandhill cranes, because you cannot separate the appearance of cranes from the sound of cranes.
Now, these birds can fly huge distances for their migrations. Maybe that's down to that giant wingspan that they have. They sometimes nest as far north as the Arctic Circle and then as far south as northern Mexico. What brings them to Monte Vista, where this festival is held each March?
Well, that's a traditional wintering area for this Rocky Mountain population. There's a lot of Sandhill cranes in the world, but they exist in different regional populations that follow different flyways. Learning sort of a combination of innate, genetically coded instructions that tell them to go in a certain direction at a certain time of the year, but also learning from their family members. Unlike a lot of birds, which travel entirely on their own, Sandhill cranes travel initially in family groups when they come south in the fall. The colts, the young of the year, as young Sandhill cranes are known, are traveling with their parents. And so they learn specific routes and then wintering areas and stopover sites from their parents. So there's this intergenerational transfer of information, which is not something you get with the vast majority of migratory birds.
That's so fascinating. Scott, you mentioned the sound of Sandhill cranes. Those calls are very distinctive. You've observed them around the Platte River in Nebraska, where you will see thousands of cranes migrating, potentially. Describe the cacophony of sound that you might hear when you go see them.
That's actually really hard to describe. It's been described as this high trumpeting or bugling, baying sound. I mean, there's aspects of it that sound like somebody running their fingers across a comb made of bamboo. There's a staccato quality to it, and it's rarely just one crane. That's the thing. These birds travel in great flocks. They winter in great flocks. So when you're not just listening to one or two of them, you're usually listening to thousands of them. And when I'm taking people to see Sandhill cranes for the first time and they say, I'm really excited to see Sandhill cranes, I think to myself, you have no idea, but what you're going to be moved by is the sound of Sandhill cranes.
And Sandhill cranes have been a symbol of fidelity in folklore because they mate for life. How is their pairing unique among birds, and why is it so moving to see?
Well, it's not just sandhill cranes. Cranes in general show this fidelity to their mate, to their long-lived birds. Sandhill cranes can live up to 35 years.
Oh, wow.
And, it's not that they never fool around a little bit on the side. That does sometimes happen. But for the most part, they mate, if not for life, at least for the long term. And that's actually kind of a rare thing. You look out your backyard and you see the robins and the sparrows out there. They're monogamous for a season, but they don't have the same mate year after year after year. Whereas with the sandhill cranes, and this is one of the things that's so great about watching them, you get to see this pairing. They do these elaborate dances where they're leaping in the air and bowing and pirouetting and these sort of minuets. And, again, these are big birds with like 6.5 foot wingspans, and they're leaping and jumping and vocalizing to each other. And it's just beautiful to see. It's really heartwarming to see.
And that is so human too, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's one of the reasons that humans all around the world have loved and revered and idolized cranes all around the world. There are many, many species of cranes in the world. All of them are highly social. All of them are highly demonstrative in this way. Many of them are critically endangered, like whooping cranes. And so the sandhill cranes are one example of a crane species, probably the best example of a crane species that is thriving in this modern world. And so that's another reason to celebrate them.
You've talked about how they're not afraid of people. Could you say more about why that is and how unusual that is?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're not afraid of people. They can be fairly tolerant of humans, although we need to give them space, and we can certainly disturb them. Often, and again, I've spent time along the Platte River in Nebraska with these huge numbers, and we need to be extremely quiet and extremely careful early in the morning, because if you've got 150 or 200,000 cranes roosting on the river, if something startles them into flight, and that can be a person who forgot to turn off the flash on their cell phone when they try to take a picture out the window, suddenly stir those birds into flight.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that. But they have learned in many ways to live alongside humans in a way that other birds have not necessarily done.
Don't be that guy, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
Scott, you've spent a lot of time with these birds, but this is your first time attending the Sandhill Crane Festival in Monte Vista. What are you hoping to see there?
Well, it's just always fun to see sandhill cranes in a new environment. I've never seen them in that part of Colorado, but to see these birds fitting themselves, as they have for hundreds of thousands of years probably, into these different environments it's another example of just how incredibly adaptable these birds are.
Well, I hope you have a wonderful time there.
Well, thank you so much, Erin. I'm looking forward to it very much myself.
Scott Weidensall is a writer and ornithologist. He's speaking this weekend at the Monte Vista Crane Festival, which celebrates sandhill cranes. We'll put a link to more information in our show notes and at KUNC.org. And we want to thank the Cornell Lab of Ornithology Macaulay Library for the recordings from their Sandhill Crane audio archive. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening. And we'll leave you with some more sounds of these unusual birds.